I guess a little bit of my background. I've spent probably the last 17, 18 years running around central, southern, southwest Queensland. Spent 7 years with Commonwealth Bank in agri-finance. Then a couple of years with the Valuer General's Department, and then the last 9 odd years with Fraser Valuers in Wandarn. I guess I grew up on a family property in the Glenmorgan district, and these days my wife and I run a couple of cattle places in there as well. So I've sort of had a little bit of practical experience, a bit of banking experience, a bit of valuation experience, and we'll see if we can try and tie these in together in how we view property values in the light of the new world of carbon. So why are the considerations of the impact on property values by carbon abatement contracts important? I guess the main thing is your property is your major asset, or most people's major asset. So you want to know, by entering into one of these contracts, you're not going to actually depreciate the value of your major asset. So you want to know that you're going to get more income, or the gains from the carbon are going to outweigh any of your potential losses in productivity and underlying capital value. Every carbon contract will be registered to your property's title. If your property is mortgaged to the bank, which most are, your bank is going to want to consent to that registration of that contract. I think we discussed earlier today. And depending on your financial position, your bank is likely to want to know what the carbon contract is going to do for your cash flow and their security position. Most banks have the expertise to determine the impact on your cash flow internally, but often they won't have the expertise internally to look at the valuation side or the underlying and their security position, so they look to engage external valuers to do this on their behalf. So what impact is a carbon abatement contract going to have on your property? Well, at this point, nobody really knows. There has been no sales in the marketplace to show us what's happening. As you know, values and valuations are always based on, you know what next door sold for, how's that compare in carrying capacity. That part's reasonably easy depending on country types and so forth. But really we haven't seen activity in the marketplace under this current scheme where we have ongoing cash flow incomes from carbon contracts. We are aware of sales where there was receipt of upfront payments. These had sort of about 20% of the places locked in. And this did occur in 2006-2007 when the market was fairly active. And those sales showed there was very little reduction in value because of this area locked up. Now they were essentially mulga blocks, and the clearing to not clearing didn't have massive impacts on carrying capacity. We do know that every situation is different, and carbon contracts will influence every property differently. So in the absence of sales data, how do we determine impact on a property's value? As valuers, the best way we can do it is try and view a property through the eyes of the market. What's the market going to look at when they're looking at a property, to buy a property with a carbon project in place? To do this, we, Fraser Valuers, we've spent quite some time trying to develop a methodology to take into the consideration the positive and negative impacts of carbon abatement. In the absence of sales evidence, we've got to have a methodology to rely on. We just can't go and say, oh, we think it's about this. Because if we ever end up in the courtroom over it, we've got to have a robust methodology to which we made our assumptions. Our methodology, we've spent quite a bit of time talking to a series of banks, taking it to their senior internal valuers, their senior credit people, and also project proponents to get their views on it as well. And as far as we're aware, the only valuation firm to Queensland to have developed a methodology to assess carbon contracts on rural properties at this point. What are the major components to a methodology? I guess there's two major components. We've got the rural property and what the impact of carbon contracts is going to do to carrying capacity. And then we've got the income stream from the carbon contract. And then there's also other indirect factors. So the impacts to the underlying property value. More than likely there's going to be an area of the property locked up that you can't continue to clear. So what will be the reduction in carrying capacity over time? That's going to vary significantly on land system. For example, box yellow jacket country at Boland, buffalo country, it's probably going to be impacted more greatly than, say, flood out Coolabah country, where the water does most of the water flow provides most of the moisture for the grass growth. And that's going to be, again, very different to Mulga country. Often these areas that are set aside for the carbon projects are in multiple spots within paddocks and across the property. So more than likely, there's going to be increased management and mustering costs. What considerations that, and this is going to be different for every property depending on the layout. So we've got to take some sort of consideration. Does this have to be fenced, or is there going to be additional costs in mustering, helicopters? Is it easy to fence off a corner and just put in some trap gates? Do you have to relocate water points to make management easier for the property? What is the likely cost of this? Is it going to cost $100,000 to get your property back into the management position that you had previously? You can do it, whether you can do it by yourself or two people, or now you need a team of 5 to try and get the same result. The income stream from the carbon. What is the projected income per year? Often it's on a bell curve or a sliding curve, as we saw behind me earlier. More than likely to get a greater income stream for the first 10 to 15 years than what you're going to get long term. Consequently, income stream reduces as your trees mature. So what's the overall term of your contract? The federal government ones are currently 10 years. There's been some previously that were 5 and 7. What is the contracted carbon price over the fixed term? We saw it's $13.12 was the average price. That could have varied between 10 and 15. What are the income risks? Obviously, as we heard earlier, fire is a major income risk. What is the cost to manage that? And we see forestry that have got fire breaks around the exterior, and then they cut them into separate lots. So if you get a fire in one section, it's not going to take out that whole area. Locusts, who knows? Another important factor is the contract with. Obviously, most of them currently for federal government. We've seen ones with BP, BHP, others. What is the security of those contracts? And often this income stream is going to be reduced over time as those trees mature, as I said earlier. So are there any other factors to consider? When we're looking at the value of the property? Well, now we have a diversity of income streams. We've got a carbon income, as well as the traditional incomes. And then we've got the potential for carbon farming. I've seen some guys put up proposals where they're happy to take the income stream for the first 5 years, but then start buying, utilise that income stream to potentially buy area back. And they might start off with 20% of their property, but they're proposing as they buy the carbon back, they'll knock down more trees and come back to 10%. Or they find that particular area difficult to manage, they'll buy carbon back and knock that piece over. There's potential to shift it. We heard earlier, the guys said that you couldn't relocate a specific project, but there may be potential to buy, say you're on $80 an acre country at Bowen, maybe the potential to buy suitable property that for $20 somewhere, get another project approved there, take the income stream from that project and buy back the carbon off this other project and convert your carbon, or you can knock those trees back down and utilise it for standard, your beef or your sheep. Again, if global commodity prices go to $10 for cattle, it may well be worth you buying that carbon back, knocking those trees over and converting it back to grazing country. Likewise, if the price of carbon drops to say 50 cents, it may well be economic for you to buy your carbon back and knock the trees back and put it back into a rural production program. So there's plenty of other factors there. A lot of people, in my experience with it, a lot of people are seeing it as being similar to the veg management, where that area is locked up forever, you can't do anything with it. That is probably not 100% correct to view it that way. There's other ways you can manage the carbon, and those areas you can continue to graze on it. I know there's a few banks looking at it that you're just going to have to lock that area up, it's a pig paddock. That's probably not 100% true. So will the carbon project on your property influence value in the long term? Yes, it likely will. Will that impact be positive and negative? That's going to vary on everybody's situation and their carbon project that's being undertaken. In general, and I'll disclaim this again, this is general advice, any change in value may really depend on how you choose to use your cash flow from your carbon program. If it's just taken away from the property and nothing's reinvested, it is likely carrying capacity will reduce over time, and the value of your property will more than likely reduce over time, assuming a stable market. If the cash flow or part thereof from the carbon is reinvested, you use that money to clear land that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to, or construct an exclusion fence or something like that, it is more than likely that the carbon program is going to be able to assist you improve your property value. So Darren asked any crystal ball stuff. Look, this is a rapidly evolving space. The work we did 6 to 12 months ago was before the federal government contracts. So the risk, they were 5 and 7 year contracts. Now we're looking at federal government based 10-year contracts for security of income stream. So that's a lot more positive than the previous contracts. The knowledge about carbon is improving, and that's why everyone's here today. Banks is always are cautious with new ventures. However, our experience suggests that they are becoming more comfortable with this as time moves on. Will a change in federal government change the potential to sell carbon in Australia? I think we're still going to have a carbon trading system, and it's just going to depend. If the Labor government gets back, I can only assume they're going to change it to. They won't be able to sit there with the same methodology. There's no way. But I think there's still going to be a carbon trading mechanism floating around. There may be a time gap between the current lot and the new lot. And the other thing is, obviously, will the price stay at its current level? Potentially it could go up. Potentially a lot of major organisations, major banks could go, well, we can change our lighting from fluoro tubes to LEDs, and it's going to cost us $2 a tonne to do that. We will go into the market at $5 a tonne, and that may bring down the average carbon price. We don't know where that's going to go.
How can you bring the bank along with you on this journey when they are fearful of the unknown? I noticed you identified some of the primary issues, but is there anything that you can sell to the bank to say, this is really something that we want you to come with us on this journey, not stonewall us
Yeah, sure. My experience with banks is communication. So, what's that, sorry? My experience with banks is communication. And it may well be worth bringing your project proponent along with you with a meeting to the bank, or keep, to try and fully inform the bank. Last thing you want them is to go off with something they read on the internet, because their credit guys are sitting in Brisbane just looking up and researching what they can on the internet. So it's trying to present your full property plan, your project, in conjunction with your proponent. Your proponent is essentially a business partner in this with you, and so is your bank in a lot of senses. So, it's very important to select, to just make sure you've got the right proponent working with you.
We found the banks challenging at the start a couple of years ago, I think, when it was very novel. I think now we're working with about 80 different landowners, right across the whole market in terms of banks that you'd know, and I think most of them were found you're finding a lot of the times it's a pathway out from under a lot of debt that people aren't otherwise able to service.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's one thing, what we've noticed is, once the bank sees the size of the payment, they're pretty excited about it, in a lot of cases. Look, and another point I will add, people will be thinking, okay, I'm going to enter into this 10-year contract, and circumstances change 3 years down the track, and you decide you would like to market your property. Now, how is the market going to view that property with a contract in place? I'm aware of some properties south of here that were put to the market with the potential for carbon, and there wasn't a great deal of interest. Look, we do a lot of work in the Surat Basin, and that was probably the case with, there's a lot of stark differences between gas compensation and carbon contracts. But we saw 4, 5, 6 years ago a big reluctance to go into properties with gas wells on them, even though there was an income stream. That has changed as it's become more common, and people are very comfortable with it, and there's actually people seeking properties with gas compensation income streams on them, as long as the income streams is good. Over time, that may well happen with carbon. If there's good income streams with carbon and the market gets comfortable with them and the process, well, it may well become a selling point on properties, as long as you've got a good project in place, it's secure, and you've got a good secure income stream.
If I understand it correctly, if you have a 25-year project, a 10-year contract, say land is to be transacted at the end of the 10-year period, the person perhaps buying in has to then deal with 15 years of the remainder of the project. And this may be a portal question. Can you put the income stream of the contract over the whole life of the project, so that that income stream is evenly distributed over that time rather than what you're front?
I believe the short answer to that's no. Is there any others in the room that can expand on that?
You can renew your contract if you can find another buyer.
Because a 10-year income stream is your 10-year fixed price contract with the federal government. Beyond that, you've got to go and get another fixed or reset price for another term.
The project's 25 years.
To meet your, what's the word for it again? I've got a mental brain. Your permanency period.
Yeah. I think the arrangement there is that you're reselling after 10 years, although you've got a 25-year commitment to that outcome. But the other 15 years, you can still go ahead and get income from.
I guess an analogy of that's, say, a commercial lease on a building. It's a 25-year lease, but you've got a fixed rental term, a known rental rate for the first 10 years, and then you renegotiate the rent after 10.